Howdy, my totally as always tubular gamers. Thanks for coming back to the channel. Really appreciate you. If you're new here, maybe stick around because today I got a ranking video for you. Today we're ranking Persona games. Oh yeah, we're talking about all of the Persona games, ranking them worst to best. Let's just get right into it. But before we begin, I'm going to ask the question, what's your favorite Persona?
Now, the Persona series at this point, I don't really think it needs all that much of an introduction. It is one of the most well-known JRPG franchises in gaming today. It has absolutely surpassed its parent franchise, Shin Megami Tensei. The series has really become one of Sega's flagship franchises. People love this series to death, whether it's the characters, the battle mechanics, the life sim elements, or the music. People love Persona, myself included, and so today we're going to rank all of the games worst to best. Now, I've talked about Persona a few times on the channel, whether it was all the games centered around Persona 5 or the mainline games, but today we really are looking at all of them. I'm looking at all of the Persona games that have been released in the West, ranking them worst to best, seeing how they all stack up against each other. I'll be giving each one of them a little review, sharing my thoughts, feelings, memories, etc. It is worth noting I will only be including one version of each of these games outside of P3R, as almost all of these games have been re-released in some capacity. And speaking of Persona 3 Reload, I want to give a big shout out to Atlus and Sega. They hooked me up with a review code. It is very, very much appreciated. Super cool. Thank you. And as always, this is just my personal unfiltered opinion. Let me know if you agree, disagree, if you think I got some hot takes or cold takes, all of that. Just let me know down below. Any support truly is greatly appreciated. You know, I got the super thanks and the Patreon, even exclusive videos on the Patreon now. But if you even made it to this part of the video, I'm going to thank you already, as I am just a one-man army. There's no team or anything like that here, and I hope you enjoy the video. So let's get right into it. Of all the Persona games, which do I think is the weakest? Persona! So I really don't think it should come as a surprise that I think the weakest of the Persona games is really all of the dancing games. And yes, there is actually 3 games here. There's Persona 4 Dancing All Night, Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight, and Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight. But no matter how many times I made this list with these games individually, these 3 games were always at the bottom. And so I'm just going to combine them all and say the Persona dancing games. Now, of these 3 dancing games, I can say Persona 4 Dancing All Night is quite a bit better actually than the other 2 games. It does have a fully fleshed out story mode, complete with new characters, and it is actually pretty decent. The other 2 games, their stories really feel just thrown together, and to say the least, they were just nothing special. When it comes to the gameplay, it's pretty much the same across all of these games. It is a pretty standard rhythm game where there's 6 buttons you press in line with the music. If you've seen a game like this before, you'll know exactly how this plays. It certainly doesn't move the rhythm game genre forward, and I certainly don't think it's taking advantage of the Persona or Shin Megami Tensei brand, but it's decent enough. I mean, hey, you get to see your favorite Persona characters dancing, and you get to hear some really awesome music. The music in all 3 of these games is pretty good. Persona doesn't really miss with their music. I mean, there are a few tracks I don't really care for, a few remixes where I'm like, I don't know about that, but a majority of the music in these 3 games is very good. The presentation ain't half bad either. Look, these are rhythm games designed for Persona fans. If you like rhythm games, you're probably gonna like these games. And if you like Persona or really like the Persona characters, I think you're going to enjoy these games. They're not horribly offensive, they're relatively harmless spin-offs that don't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. I think they're decent enough. I can see they have pretty limited appeal, but I've seen much worse spin-offs from plenty of other series. This is fine compared to what I've seen. I don't really have much else to say about these games, as again, they are just pretty standard rhythm games. If you want to see your favorite Persona characters get jiggy with it, these are the games to play. And here we have Persona 4 Arena releasing in 2012. Now, Persona 4 Arena is very different from all of the other Persona games. It is not an RPG, not in the slightest. It is actually a fighting game developed by Arc System Works, a very storied fighting game developer. They created the Guilty Gear and BlazBlue series, they created Dragon Ball FighterZ, they even did the most recent Grand Blue fighting game. They've certainly been around the block is what I'm trying to say, and this game is much more in line with their games rather than what you'd expect from a Persona game. Now, when it comes to this game's story, it is actually a direct sequel to Persona 4, but not just Persona 4, it actually is a sequel to Persona 3 as well, as plenty of Persona 3 characters show up here, and it sees a bunch of our favorite characters from both games getting dragged into this mysterious new fighting tournament within the Midnight Channel itself. And all I'll say for the story is I don't actually think it's very good. The game does actually have like a full-length story. There are characters, there's cutscenes, there's like visual novel elements. It's more than just a simple synopsis. It's way more than the average fighting game. Most fighting games barely even have a story. This game, it does have an actual plot, characters, ending, etc. And unfortunately, in my opinion, it's just not very good. I don't know, it just didn't hit with me. I just didn't really care for the story or the characters, and I was just like, it's here, I don't really care where it goes. And that's a shame because there's a fully fledged story in this game, and that's not too common for fighting games, especially from the 2010s. And speaking of the 2010s, this very much feels like a fighting game from the early 2010s. If you've ever played BlazBlue or Guilty Gear, it does feel quite similar to that, only there's a bunch of other Persona mechanics thrown in here. And honestly, there's kind of a lot going on here when it comes to the fighting mechanics. When I first played this game, I thought it was going to be similar to the JoJo fighting game on Dreamcast, but no, there's way more going on here than that game. There's a bit more depth and complexity than that game, and it's not always for the better. So the game is a 4-button fighter, 2 heavy, 2 light attacks, and while your characters can attack each other, obviously the big appeal is having their persona there. And when your persona is out, you can do special attacks depending on how much SP you have. If you're out though, you ain't doing shit with that persona. Interestingly enough, your persona actually can get attacked by the other player. If your persona gets attacked, you'll lose a blue card, which is under your health bar. And if you lose 4 of them, you actually won't be able to summon your persona, which is a neat touch and adds to a bit of the complexity. But it also means if you're playing against someone who actually knows their shit, you can get shut down real fast in this game where you can barely even summon your persona and you just get your ass whooped. There's even an instant kill move if you have enough SP, which is just wild. On top of that, they try to keep the status ailments from the main series here, so you can actually poison them to death, you can slow them down, you can halt their movement entirely, and yeah, it's pretty easy to see immediately that there's a fair amount of complexity with this fighting game. I mean, the SP gauge alone adds a fair amount of complexity. This isn't just some normal super gauge here, and with all this complexity, is the fighting even any good in this game? Yeah, I think it's alright. Look, this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I never thought the fighting in this game was amazing. I thought it was alright. There's some fun to be had here. You can pull off a few stylish moves, maybe even an insta-kill if you get lucky, but this game is a pretty sharp difficulty curve, especially compared to other anime fighters, and honestly, I'd kind of rather play other anime fighters. I'd much rather play almost any other Guilty Gear, and would low-key rather play most of the BlazBlues over this game, but the fighting is still solid. Again, there is fun to be had here. I've had some fun with it. I've had some moments where I do look cool, but the moment you play against somebody that has any idea what they're doing, you're just going to get destroyed. And sure, not every fighting game needs to have a casual audience, but I think a great fighting game is one that you can have fun with casually and on a professional level, and this game, it really feels like it doesn't cater to the casuals all that much. You know, unless you're playing in story mode where you play with the auto combos and you just mash one button over and over and over, then yeah, you'll win, but I don't know how much fun you're going to have with it, and you're certainly not going to understand this game's mechanics. And outside of the story mode, you have the tutorial, like these little challenges, and the arcade mode. It isn't exactly booming with content. The story mode sees you choosing a character and going through a path, and while it is cool how there's a bunch of different paths, they really intertwine and they just repeat shit a lot of the time. And like I said earlier, I just didn't love the story. At least the presentation is very good. The sprites look excellent, the backgrounds are great, the music slaps, the presentation is very good. Nobody's going to deny that one, but when it comes to this game as the overall package, I think it's just alright. I think there are plenty of other better fighting games that I'd much rather play than this game, and even as a fan of Persona, I think it's just okay. Now, would I recommend this game nowadays? Probably not. You need to be a pretty big fan of Persona or fighting games, I think, to really enjoy it, and then it's not available on modern consoles. It's not widely accessible like the sequel is. But hey, if you really love Persona, I think you can still find a few things to like with this game. And so here we have Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth releasing for the 3DS in 2014. Now this game is pretty different from the other Persona games. It's actually a crossover between Persona 3 and 4 and sees all of the characters from both of those games getting sucked into this new world that is quite similar to Persona 4 School, and it's about them just trying to figure out what the hell is going on and helping these two people get their memories back. The story, it's pretty decent for what it is. I'm not going to act like it's this fantastic, bold, grand story with a ton of depth, because it's not that. It's not trying to be that. It's relatively lighthearted. It's relatively easy to follow. It's pretty simple, all things considered, and it feels like this was kind of made so we could get a bunch of fan service for the Persona 3 and 4 characters. I mean, they get to actually interact with each other, and there's some pretty great interactions here. In fact, I'll just immediately say the story's pretty whatever. It's the characters that make this story. It's great to see all the characters. It's great to see them interact with the other characters. Sure, they feel a little watered down, and simplified compared to the main games, but I still like them. I like the interactions they all have, and the characters really make the story, and by extension the game. Maybe I'm just biased because I love some of these characters. Either way, the story and the characters I thought were decent enough. Now when it comes to the gameplay, it is different from the mainline Persona games. It's a mix of Persona and the Etrian Odyssey series. On the Persona front, all the battles play out like an SMT game. The characters have their personas, the criticals, the one more, the elements, all of that is there. But the dungeon crawling, the dungeon design, it very much is an Etrian Odyssey game where it's in first person and you're just kind of wandering around these maze-like floors, really looking for the stairs to progress through. Along the way, you'll find plenty of enemies that want to whoop your ass, but there's even treasure hidden in here as well. And this gameplay loop, it's fine for what it is. It's decent. I'm not going to act like it's revolutionary or innovative or all that original for the SMT franchise, and honestly, adding in the Etrian Odyssey dungeon design doesn't really add all that much. In fact, I'd actually say the Etrian Odyssey dungeon design is like my biggest issue with this game. It got very tiresome and tedious to draw the maps, especially by the end of the game, and it just felt a bit repetitive. Yeah, the dungeon crawling, I feel like it could have been better. At least the battle mechanics are solid enough, and when everything comes together, yeah, like I said, the gameplay loop, it's fine. The game certainly didn't hook me in like really any of the mainline games, but I still did enjoy my time with it. I don't regret it. I didn't dislike it. It's just, I think a lot of other Persona games have much better gameplay loops and are a much better experience. At least the presentation for the 3DS, I think it looks pretty good. The music is good. And I think that if you enjoy Persona 3 and 4, and if you really love the characters of Persona 3 and 4, you're gonna like this game. Is it as good as any of the mainline games? No. But it still is a good game. And I wouldn't be surprised if this game and its sequel is re-released in the future. Speaking of the sequel, we have Persona Q2 New Cinema Labyrinth releasing for the 3DS in 2019. Now, Persona Q2 is a very similar game to the first one in many aspects. The game is a crossover still. This time it's not just Persona 3 and 4, but 5 is introduced, and really that's the biggest addition of this game, is that Persona 5 is here. The story does center around the Persona 5 cast primarily, as they're just locked in this theater and are forced to go through films, and along the way they make plenty of allies with Persona 3 and 4 characters, and like the first game, there's a ton of great fan service. There's even more here since Persona 5 characters are here. Like, if you enjoy the cast of Persona 3, 4, or 5, I think you're going to like the story. You're going to, at the very least, like the character interactions. There's a lot of great stuff here. I'm not going to say it's one of the greatest crossovers ever in gaming, but I think it's a decent enough little story. When it comes to the gameplay, incredibly similar to the first Persona Q, where it's a mix of Etrian Odyssey and Persona. When it comes to the battle mechanics, it is just as good as really any other SMT game at the time. I don't think there's as much strategy as some of the mainline Persona games, but I think the battle mechanics are good. When it comes to the dungeon crawling, it basically is the same as the first one, where you have to map out these dungeons, you're looking for the stairs, there's enemies, and there's treasure along the way. I think the dungeon crawling is a little better in this game. It didn't feel as tedious or tiresome by the end of it. You still are just mapping everything out, and there were plenty of times where I was like, okay, I'm ready for this dungeon to end, but I don't know, it didn't feel as repetitive of the first game. Maybe I just went in with a different mindset, but it was a little better in that sense. The gameplay, I'd say overall, is just a tad bit better. Like the first game though, the presentation for the 3DS is pretty good. I think it's a good looking game and the music does slap. And so in conclusion, if you like Persona Q1, if you really love the cast of 3, 4, and 5, if you like Etrian Odyssey, you're going to enjoy this game. Is it going to blow you away? Probably not, but it's a decent, fun little dungeon crawler that is still a good time. And interestingly enough, this was like the last major 3DS title released in North America, so at least the 3DS went out with a good game. This is probably going to be a very pricey game in the future unless it gets re-released though, so if you're really interested in it, get it now while it's cheaper. And here we have it, the game that started it all, the original Persona. Originally releasing on the PS1 as Persona Revelations, it was eventually redone on the PSP as just Persona. Now, coming back to the original Persona after playing, all of the other games, it's pretty crazy, and the original game is certainly humble beginnings, because while I think this is a good game, I'll be the first to say Persona 1 isn't exactly anything all that special. And I have tried multiple times to get invested in this game and really just dig my teeth into it like I'm Edward or something, and every single time I just really haven't been able to. Now, when it comes to the story and characters, this game is very different from all the other Persona games, especially that original PS1 release. This might be the darkest of the Persona games. This or two, like, it is just a very dark, grim, depressing atmosphere. It is still at a high school, and it is about high schoolers getting into mischief. They're playing this game called Persona, and I'll just say a bunch of dark, bad shit happens. Like, this is not an uplifting, enlightening, positive story. It's dark and sad and depressing and sinister even. And so it is cool that it is so different from the other Persona games, but did I personally like it? I thought it was just alright. I didn't love it, but I mean, different isn't always bad. And I mean, this was the first game. At the time, this was just another spin-off in the SMT series. I mean, I don't think anybody could have predicted what it would become. And that PSP version does try to make it more in line with the other games. They even changed the music completely, which is way better in my opinion, but it's still a pretty dark game. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, this is really where I struggle with the original Persona. It just hasn't aged very well at all. It's sadly one of those games that as time goes on, it feels like the game just gets worse and worse. And the PSP version does fix a few things, it speeds things up, and it is a better experience, but still, it hasn't aged all that well. First off, the navigation, the map design, the dungeon crawling, it just isn't very good in this game. It's actually pretty similar to Persona Q, where it's in first person and you're walking around these just kind of maze-like areas. The navigation, it's not particularly fun, the encounter rate is very high, and I found myself frequently getting lost. But I think that's because I wasn't staring at the map enough because I was in all the random battles. Speaking of battling, this game does a few things different from legit any other Persona game, particularly the grid. This game has a grid system on top of all of the other usual SMT mechanics, and I think this grid system sucks. It's clunky, it's unintuitive, really almost all the menus are unintuitive in this game, but the grid system is very unintuitive, it's awkward, it's not fun to engage with. Instead of adding depth to this battle system, I feel like it's a hindrance and it takes away from it. There are several spots on it that are borderline useless, and I feel like it just detracted from my experience overall. It wasn't as bad in the PSP version, but that original PS1 game, I was like, dude, this grid system is not good. What were they thinking? But if you're able to get past the grid system, or you like the grid system, what you have is actually pretty decent combat. It still is that SMT gameplay, it's still rewarding and fun, and it's also quite challenging. This game has no problem kicking your ass. It also has no problem looking like ass. This is not a very good looking game. For the PS1 or the PSP version, I just think the presentation is kind of weak. At least the music in the PSP version is very good. Overall, the original Persona, I can see why people liked it, and I still think it is a good game, but I really do think it is the weakest of the mainline Persona games. But if you've played all the newer ones and you want to try one of the old ones, try the PSP game. You might be pleasantly surprised. There are a few things I still do like about this game. And so here we have Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, which originally released in 2014 but was re-released in 2022. Now Ultimax I think is a pretty decent improvement on Persona 4 Arena, and I think it's a good fighting game. When it comes to the story, it is actually a direct sequel to Persona 4 Arena and sees this supernatural red fog covering the town of Inaba, and it's up to our Persona 3 and 4 cast to really figure out what the hell's going on. When it comes to the story, it's a little better than the first games. I wouldn't say it's much better though. If you like the story of Persona 4 Arena, you're gonna like this, but myself, I was just kind of indifferent. Like, it seemed a bit more interesting and the characters seemed to, you know, kind of act more like themselves, but at the end of the day, I was just kind of like, It's also there. I mean, it's tolerable, but nothing special by any means. Like, it's nothing horribly offensive or insulting to Persona. I just felt kind of apathetic. Now, the first thing to bring up with this game is the roster. The original game had 13 characters, and I think it was a pretty decent roster. This game has 8 new characters, bringing the total up to 21. And just like the first game, I can appreciate how different all the characters are from each other. They really are all very different from each other in how they play, special moves, mechanics, combos, all of that fun stuff. The variety is appreciated, and I'll just immediately say, when it comes to the fighting in this game, it's better than the first games. Like, maybe I came in here with just a totally different mindset, but I had way more fun with the fighting in this game than the first one, and it is just complex. In fact, it's more complex than the original game. I think because I had the expectation that it was going to be complex, I was able to come into this game better and ultimately get more out of it. Get it? Ultimate, Ultimax, you know? Okay, I'll shut up now. All of the mechanics from Persona 4 Arena do come back here, but there are a few new mechanics. There's an S-hold system where you can actually charge up your attacks. You can actually choose a shadow type for many of the game's characters, which really is like skill based and has this really big risk versus reward system. There's a lot going on here. And again, maybe it's because I came from the first one, but I found it a little bit more digestible this time. It was easier to understand the mechanics, and it didn't feel like I was just thrown in the deep end immediately. This game has a very high skill ceiling. I have seen some tournament play when I've gone to EVO in years past, and what people are doing in this game is crazy, and I feel like they're on a different plane of existence compared to someone normal like me who just casually plays fighting games. And so that gap is really big, but I think, you know, two casual people are going at it. They're going to have more fun in this game than they had in the previous game, but the moment someone even remotely close to pro shows up, you're dead. DED, dead. But the fighting, I had fun with it. I enjoyed it. I like how there's a lot going on here. It gets pretty crazy throughout, and all of the different characters being as different as they are really just leads to a chaotic time. Do I enjoy this game as much as other anime fighters? Well, to be completely honest with you, I'd much rather play almost any other Guilty Gear or Fighter Z, but there still is fun to be had here. I still think it's satisfying. It can be very rewarding when you understand some of the game's mechanics and you like shut down someone's persona. It can be very satisfying and you can feel like a real G. But it's going to take a while before you get there. The game still isn't exactly the most noob friendly, but I had fun, so I guess at the end of the day that's really what matters. When it comes to the presentation, the game still looks excellent. The sprites are just beautiful, the environments are great, the music is excellent. I don't have any issues with the presentation, and when it comes to this game's content, there is more content than the original game. There's not a ton here, but there's more. And so the real question is, would I recommend the game? Yes, I actually would recommend the game. Something that makes this game very easy to recommend is the fact that it's actually widely available on modern consoles. It's available on all modern platforms. There are still people playing online, and that right there is a huge plus. Even if you don't love fighting games, but you have some interest in Persona 4, I think you're gonna have some fun with this game. It's not amazing, but it still is a solid time. And here we have Persona 5 Tactica, the latest in the Persona 5 series, and the series has taken another interesting turn. This time they're taking a stab at turn-based tactics. Yes, this is a tactical RPG. When it comes to the story, this game does take place during Persona 5, I guess the later half of Persona 5, and it sees our heroes, the Phantom Thieves, getting transported to another world. All of a sudden, they really are teleported to this strange other world filled with war and oppression and this crazy ruler, and so it's up to the Phantom Thieves to really save the day and stop this lady from doing whatever the hell she's trying to do. The story gets much more complex than that. They introduce a few new characters, but I actually did quite like the story here. I think the game does have a very good payoff with its story. While at first it isn't super clear what's going on, in fact it's not clear for like most of the game what's going on, once the story really starts to unravel and start to make sense and come together, yeah, I think it's actually pretty good. And again, it does have a solid payoff. I like the new characters they introduce here. They do add more to the world of Persona 5, and our main cast is as great as always. Look, the story's not going to make you go, yeehaw, this is the best story ever. No, it's not going to blow you away. It's not, absolutely amazing. It's not even as good as the main games, but out of all the Persona 5 spin-offs, I think this game is the best story. It is my favorite story, at least. But enough about the story. The first thing you probably notice when you look at this game is the aesthetic, the art style, and the fact that all of the characters are chibi. Yes, it does use a chibi art style, and while I don't like chibi in plenty of instances, this is not one of those cases. I like how this game looks, I like the chibi art style, I like that it has Persona 5's aesthetic and vibe, and I think it looks pretty good all things considered. This is clearly a more budget game by Sega and Atlus versus, the main Persona games or Yakuza or Sonic, so I'm gonna cut it a little slack, but I think it looks nice. The interface looks great as always, but it's time to talk about what you're actually doing in this game. The primary gameplay is a turn-based tactical RPG. Now, this is going to sound pretty reductive, but if you've played any of the modern XCOM games or have ever touched Mario plus Rabbids, either one, then you are going to feel very familiar with the gameplay immediately. It plays very similar to those games in several areas, but it does have a Persona flair over all of it. And like Persona 5 Strikers, I think the game is able to carve out its own identity. It does enough different things here so you don't just go, oh, it's an XCOM clone or something like that. But it does have a lot of similarities, like you'll be taking cover, you'll be moving around a grid, and having the high ground Anakin is almost always a good thing. Where this game really differs from other turn-based tactical games is when the Persona elements get thrown in here. That, and you actually can't miss any of your shots unless they're standing behind like a wall or something and they're able to totally block it off. You're not going to be standing point blank at somebody and somehow miss like an XCOM. How does that happen? It's simplified, streamlined, whatever you want to call it in that aspect, and that's fine with me. When it comes to the Persona elements, Personas are very much in play here. The elements are in play. You can hit enemies with weaknesses. They're resistant to things. And like Persona, if you hit an enemy with their weakness or get a critical, you will get one more turn, which you very much can abuse in this game. You can do all-out attacks by making triangles on the map with your characters in real time, since you do get to just freely walk around, and you're just totally able to own everything that's in the triangle, and it's actually really satisfying to pull off, and you feel like a genius if you happen to get like all the enemies on a map. On top of that, something different from all the other Persona games is you can actually equip personas to any party member. They all get one persona you can equip to them on top of their base persona, so you can give them different moves and actually make them have slightly different build. They don't all feel crazy different from each other, but I like that there was a little difference between the characters and it made you strategize who you were going to choose. And then of course, as you progress through the game, you get experience and can level up your characters. There's skill points, you can change their weapons out, there's even some side missions you can do, but there's no kind of social link confidant bond system here, which is an interesting choice. But when it comes to the core gameplay, the tactical combat, what you're doing like 80% of this game, I actually think it's pretty great. It's fun, it has a really good flow and pace to it, it's fast. I don't think the game gets bogged down in the Persona elements. I really do think they enhance the tactical gameplay, and you can have some 9,000 IQ moves here, and it's really cool. There's actually a good amount of enemy types here, and you'll need different strategies for each one. There's even some bosses that show up, so that's pretty cool. I will mention though that this game is not the most challenging. In fact, I'll just straight up say it, it's a pretty easy game. Like the Persona elements they throw in there, like one more in the criticals, make this game relatively easy. As someone who's played XCOM and both Mario plus Rabbids, I really never had an area where I struggled or even had to retry something more than once. I don't even think I ever died. I just didn't like how I went about the battle and retried it. So if you're looking for that hardcore tactical experience, you're not going to find it here. This game is pretty casual in that sense, but I also think it's very inviting to the genre if you're someone who doesn't really play turn-based tactics games. I think this game is a great place to start for the genre, and if you like Persona, I think you're going to like the game. It's also relatively cheap nowadays, and it's even on Game Pass, so that's an extra bonus, but I recommend the game. And here we have Persona 5 Strikers releasing in the West in 2021. Now, Strikers, I was very intrigued from the moment it was announced, just because it was being developed by Omega Force and would be a Dynasty Warriors Musou style game. Now when it comes to the story, I'm going to try to be as spoiler free as possible and just say it takes place a few months after Persona 5 and it sees the gang getting back together and exploring some mysteries, and yeah, that's really all I'm going to say. I think the story's good. I think it's a good continuation of what Persona 5 establishes, and it continues it in a meaningful way. I love these characters. I like how this game does introduce a couple new characters, new antagonists, etc., and I think they're decently well developed. They're fine. They're good additions here. The story, yeah, I think it's good. Is it as strong as, regular Persona 5? No, but I think it is a good addition. Now when it comes to the gameplay, what you're really doing in this game is it is a mix of Persona and Omega Force's Dynasty Warriors series, so it is an action hack and slash RPG where you'll be constantly mowing down tons and tons of shadows and enemies, but there are plenty of RPG elements sprinkled in, whether it's leveling up in your stats, creating personas. Your main character, Joker, does get to equip multiple personas so you can fuse them and do all of that fun stuff. There are some side quests, there are bonds, which replaces confidants, but yeah, generally the RPG elements are not lacking. When it comes to the action side, it is very much a hack and slash. It doesn't have, a ton of depth to it, but I think it is a decent hack and slash, and I like the implementation of a bunch of Persona elements. I think the controls are more than solid enough, and the combat is actually nice. It even has some satisfying elements. All of the characters are relatively different from each other, and it feels incredibly fluid. It actually feels better than most of these Dynasty Warriors games. Like, I've played quite a bit of Dynasty Warriors and the spin-offs, whether it was the main series or Samurai Warriors or Warriors Orochi or One Piece Pirate Warriors or Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem Warriors, the Berserk spin-off, etc., etc. And I gotta say, the gameplay of this game is actually some of the best gameplay of the entire franchise, Musou series, whatever you want to call it. It's actually good. It's not too mindless. There's a little bit of depth here. The levels actually have a decent amount of level design. You'll be solving puzzles and interacting with the environment way more than you do in any other Dynasty Warriors game. The RPG elements are nice. They're not as in-depth as main Persona games, but I like that they're here. I like that the game does have a stealth system kind of implemented from Persona 5. In fact, the game has a decent amount of fan service and implementation from Persona 5. It doesn't feel like they just have a Dynasty Warriors game with the Persona license slapped on it. No, this very much does feel like a Persona game. It just happens to be an action RPG that has a number of similarities to Dynasty Warriors, and I think it's actually a ton of fun. It's got a good length to it, taking well over 30 to 40 hours. The game has a very nice presentation. The music, of course, the music's gonna slap. Like, this game has a lot going for it, and if you're a fan of Persona, particularly Persona 5, this game is almost a must-play. Like, if you hate action RPGs or hack and slashes, then yeah, I guess you're not going to really like the game, but it does have more than you'd expect. There's actually in-depth dungeons, the characters feel quite different from each other, there is the RPG elements, it's more than just a mindless hack and slash where you press one or two buttons the entire time. I think the game has a good story, I like the characters it introduces, and it actually feels like it really does expand the world of Persona 5, which is really all you could hope for from one of these spin-offs. It doesn't just feel like a mindless cash grab by Sega and Atlus, it is a full-length action RPG that has a lot going for it, and I have, again, no problem recommending it to anyone who likes Persona. And so here we have Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, which came out for the PS1 in 2000. Unfortunately, the PSP remake still has not officially come overseas. Hopefully that changes one day. So this game is actually the second part of the Persona 2 duology. It is a direct sequel to Persona 2 Innocent Sin and is very similar in terms of its gameplay, story, and themes. So this game follows Maya Amano, a main character and love interest from Innocent Sin, and she investigates the Joker curse, which gets started in the first game where all the dreams and rumors are coming to life and causing chaos. Like I'll mention soon enough with Innocent Sin, the storytelling, characters, and world is a huge step up from the original Persona. It is significantly better. The characters are memorable, they're likable, they're actually just a bit more fleshed out. A bunch of characters from the previous game return, shoot, even some characters from Persona 1 show up, which I think is actually pretty cool. I think the story, it's intriguing, it's interesting, the world building was relatively solid, and I really did want to see what was going to happen next. Tonally, this game is still pretty different from the later Persona games. It is still dark and relatively serious, and so if you're looking for that cheery vibe that the later games have, you're not going to find it here. But yeah, I thought the story was good. When it comes to the gameplay, this game really does address like all the criticisms I had with the original Persona for a much better experience. But something you'll actually notice before the gameplay is probably this game's presentation. It looks a lot better than the first game, the sprites are better, the backgrounds are better, and the music still slaps. The presentation, it really just is a big improvement on what the original game had. But anyway, when it comes to the gameplay, it really is a lot better. I think the first improvement is that the grid/movement system is just totally gone. Anything resembling that is gone. It is much more of a traditional role-playing game when it comes to the battles. It plays very similar to really any SMT game. Sure, it is more unrefined than say the later Persona games, but if you've played any SMT game, you're going to understand how the battles work. But it certainly has aged a little bit. The game actually does have a fair amount of strategy with its battles, and it can actually get incredibly challenging, almost as challenging as the first game. Something else worth pointing out that's an improvement is this game's speed and pacing is a lot better than the first games. It just moves faster, the battles go quicker, and the overall pacing of the game is just straight up better. When it comes to the navigation, it's also better. The dungeons are not in first person, and they're nowhere near as just ridiculous as the first games. They're better designed. Sure, they get really grindy and a bit repetitive towards the end, but the dungeons are actually alright. The camera can be a bit awkward though. I'd also say the menus and general interface can be awkward at times, but that really is just time passing and generally dating this game. Like talking to the demons, talking to them just kind of sucks. And while we're being negative, I'll say I do have some issues with this game. While it is a relatively large improvement over the first game, the exploration, it still isn't great. Enemy encounter rates are just too high in my opinion. Some dungeons just take too long. And some battles, particularly certain enemies, are just really freaking annoying in this game. Like, shit, man, I hate some of these guys. But despite these issues, I'd still say Eternal Punishment is a pretty decent RPG. I wouldn't say this is one of the PS1's very best JRPGs, but I still did enjoy my time with it. I'd say it's actually relatively underrated. I don't hear that many people talk about it, and I think that's because most people haven't played the Persona games before P3, but I totally think it's worth playing, especially if you like Persona, and this game, honestly, it really just needs some kind of re-release. I think it just needs that modern accessibility. That and its prequel. Speaking of, here we have Persona 2 Innocent Sin, which originally came out on the PS1 in '99, but it actually never came over to the West. The West never got it until the PSP remake that came out in 2011. Now, Innocent Sin takes place before Eternal Punishment and stars high school student Tetsuya, who joins up with a group of friends, and it's about them investigating this curse that is placed on their high school where dreams and rumors can become reality, and as usual, the fate of the world eventually is in the hands of a bunch of high school students. Now when it comes to this game's story, world, and characters, it's a pretty big improvement on the original Persona. The characters are all interesting, they have depth, they have arcs, it's actually pretty great stuff here. The world building is very good throughout and they keep things intriguing, and the way the game progresses, I quite liked it. I really wanted to see what was going to happen. Tonally, it is pretty different from the later Persona games. It is dark, it is sinister, and it is different, but I actually quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters and the dark world and what happens. Now when it comes to this game's gameplay, it's very similar to what I described with Eternal Punishment, with it being the PSP remake and not a PS1 game. There are some quality of life improvements, but the core gameplay is still that SMT gameplay that you should be very familiar with if you've played legit any SMT game from the late 90s or 2000s. It's incredibly similar to all of those. At least the general gameplay has been sped up, it's got a very good pace to it, and the interface is actually pretty decent to good, but that's because this is the PSP remake. But it's not exactly the same as all the SMT games. There are a few wrinkles here. The game does have this nice rumor system that would come back in the sequel, and something cool is all of the characters can actually switch between personas mid-battle. And there's this whole fusion spell mechanic that's actually going on that, again, it's a nice wrinkle and keeps things interesting and adds more strategy to the game. I feel like this game actually has a pretty good amount of strategy to it, even compared to the other SMT games. Like, this is a challenging game that is no problem just kicking your ass to the curb. Like, it is not messing around, especially when it comes to the boss fights. But despite all that, I'd still say I quite enjoyed this game. I think it's pretty good. I'd say it's slightly better than Eternal Punishment, and just like Eternal Punishment, I think it's underrated. It's got good characters, a good story, solid gameplay, decent presentation, and it just needs to be more widely available. I think if they re-released both Persona 2s or had some kind of remake, shit, just getting them both on modern consoles, I think would really help them out and get a lot more eyes on them, because I really do think the Persona 2 duology is absolutely worth playing. If you like RPGs, SMT, or the later Persona games, I think you're going to enjoy this, or you're going to hate how difficult it gets. Either way, I still totally think it is worth trying. And so here we have Persona 3 FES releasing on the PS2 in the late 2000s. Now Persona 3 really changed the entire Persona series. Like, it was never the same again, and it's much more in line with what we think of the Persona series nowadays. It's very different from the prior games tonally, has no connection to them, and added all of the life sim stuff. When it comes to this game's story, you play as this blue-haired kid who transfers to a new high school and is just trying to live a normal life. His hair might be blue, but the rest of him is pretty normal. But this city sure as hell ain't normal. Every night around midnight, there's this thing called the Dark Hour, which is like this hidden hour where everyone goes into coffins and monsters come out. But a few people, like our main character, don't go into coffins, and they're trying to figure out just exactly what's going on. Also, this giant tower known as Tartarus springs out of the ground as well. And that's all I'm going to say for the story. I really don't want to spoil anything. It's obviously very different from what the first couple games had, especially tonally. While it is dark in some moments, it is a much more lighthearted game than the first couple. But despite that, I really do enjoy this game's story, more so than the first couple games. I love the characters in this game. The characters really make the game. They are some of the most unforgettable characters of the entire series. And there's plenty of memorable moments and scenes that happen with these characters that I just kind of cherish at this point. Like, the story, I think it's really great, the world is interesting, the characters are solid, and while I don't think it's as good as, say, P4 and 5, I still quite enjoy it. When it comes to this game's presentation, I also enjoy it. Sure, it doesn't look amazing for a late PS2 game, but there's just something about this aesthetic and art style that really speaks to me. Maybe it's just nostalgia, but I like how this game looks. Something though that I think pretty much nobody's going to deny is this game's soundtrack. The soundtrack is truly phenomenal. It is excellent. It is so good. It is one of the best soundtracks you'll find in any game from the 2000s. It is like legendarily good. I could go off for a while about the soundtrack. Just know it's really good. Alright, but when it comes to actually playing the video game, it is a bit different from Persona 2. When it comes to the battle mechanics, this is still an SMT game at heart, and so if you've played any SMT game, you're going to understand how this game works. If you've played any later Persona game, you'll definitely understand how the battle system works. With the weaknesses, the criticals, the status effects, the all-out attack, the one more, it's all here. And sure, it's not as smooth or refined as later Persona games, but I still think it is very solid here, and it shows that they had a winning foundation pretty much from the beginning. Something that this game does that is very different from any other Persona game is you cannot directly control your party members. Unless you're playing the PSP re-release, you cannot directly control them. You can influence them, but actually giving them commands and telling them what move to use, you can't do that. And I'll just immediately say, this sucks. This is my biggest issue with the game. And I really just don't know what they were thinking. I've only ever played the PSP PS2 version of this game, so this is what I've always been with, and it is just so annoying how you can't control them. It makes the game a lot more difficult and just straight up more annoying. Outside of that though, I think the battle mechanics are actually pretty good. Again, it's a little unrefined at times, but it is still solid enough, and I have had plenty of enjoyment with the battle system. Just know that sometimes you're going to get real mad at your party members. I don't want Marin Karen again, Mitsura. Please just attack the boss. Honestly, I could be here all day talking about how stupid sometimes your party members will be, but I'm gonna just move on. When you're not in the battles, you're probably doing the dungeon crawling. Almost all of the dungeon crawling is in this giant tower known as Tartarus with legit hundreds of randomly generated floors. On these floors, you'll encounter plenty of enemies, you'll find some treasure, and are really just kind of looking for the stairs to go up to the next floor. The dungeon crawling in this game, it's okay. It's not terrible, but the more time I put into this dungeon crawling, the less and less I like it. The random generation, it's not great. Way too many of the floors feel incredibly similar with just copy and paste elements, and it really just got incredibly tiresome. The movement and controls are just super awkward as well. Swinging your melee weapon feels terrible, and it's incredibly delayed, and I got jumped so many times because of this. Like, what the hell? Like, the dungeon crawling, it could certainly be better. Okay, I've talked enough shit about the gameplay. Let's talk about some stuff I do like. The structure of this game and the life sim elements. So this game is a completely different structure from the previous couple games where you now go day to day. You go to school almost every day, and then you have some free time after, and you get to decide what you want to do. Do you want to hang out with your buddies? Do you want to study? Do you want to work a part-time job? It's all up to you. There's plenty of things to do in this game after school, and I actually really enjoy this gameplay loop. I like hanging out with the characters. They're all different. They're interesting. You do get rewards for it. It's totally worth it to up your stats as well, so you can make more social links with other equally interesting characters. You'll really be planning out your day, and of course going to Tartarus at night if you want. It can also be incredibly rewarding, like when you focus all your time on one social stat and then you're able to make that social link and it actually pays off. Yeah, it's rewarding. I like all of the life simulation stuff. While I do have some issues with the battle system and the dungeon crawling, there is way more good than bad when it comes to Persona 3. The game still has an excellent story, great characters. Sure, the pacing might not be amazing, especially the beginning of the game, but it really does pick up. The battle system, it does have plenty of good elements. The music is fantastic, and the social elements in this game, I really enjoy it. Is it the very best of the Persona series? No, not in my opinion, but I can see why so many people like it. The real question is, do I recommend this game now? Well, no, I actually don't. You know why? It's because we have Persona 3 Reload, the full remake of Persona 3 that is now finally available. I want to give a major shout out to Atlus and Sega for hooking me up with a review code. I bugged the shit out of them for it, so I really do appreciate it. But yeah, Persona 3 Reload, in my opinion, it kind of stomps a hole into the original Persona 3. Like, I think the original Persona 3 is a pretty good game, but Persona 3 Reload is way better, especially when it comes to the gameplay. When it comes to the story, characters, plot, themes, world, it's all exactly the same as the original game, complete with the Dark Hour, and even how they summon their personas. They didn't change that.
Now, in every Persona game, they're able to summon their persona a different way. Sometimes it's really interesting. Persona 3's is very interesting. In fact, I'll even give you an example. Persona...
And just like the original game, I think it's pretty excellent. I love the characters. There's so many memorable moments. I think the world building is really strong, and I think the pacing, I don't know, it feels a little better than the original game. Maybe that's just me, but I still very much like the world and characters of Persona 3. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, this is just such an improvement on that original game. Like, I'm sure people are going to groan, but to be as reductive as possible, it's like they took Persona 5's gameplay and put it into Persona 3, and it is just so much better. The battling and the dungeon crawling are just such an improvement on what the original game had. When it comes to the battles, it isn't all that different from the original game. It's a bit smoother, it's a lot faster, but the important thing, you have direct control over your party members. You can directly tell them what to do, and it's just so much better. On top of this, you have what is essentially a baton pass. After you hit an enemy with something they're weak to, you can switch over to another character to just keep the chain going and then do the all-out attack and finish the battle. And with this, you'll quickly realize that this game is nowhere near as hard as the original game, but it also goes to show that the original game shouldn't have been this hard. Not being able to control your party members really made the game that much more challenging. But despite it not being as challenging, I honestly found it just as, if not more, rewarding in the remake. The combat is hella fun. It's satisfying, it's got an excellent pace to it, and I just enjoyed it a hell of a lot more than what the original game had. The pacing in this game is significantly improved over the original game. The original game game, it is a slog at the beginning. Your characters suck, there's not a lot of personas to choose from, and they get tired super easily. The whole tired mechanic has just been taken out. Your characters don't suck at the beginning. Being able to control them makes it a lot better, and the game is just way faster throughout. A bunch of little things and quality of life improvements have come in to just make for a much better experience. For instance, when you buy new equipment, you can immediately sell what you were wearing before. Thank you. Like I mentioned, the whole tired mechanic that was in the original game is just dropped. It shouldn't have even been there to begin with, to be honest. Shuffle time no longer shuffles the cards around, you just get to pick. Thank you. And then we have the dungeon crawling. The dungeon crawling is so much better than the original game. The movement and controls are way better. You can run now. The random generation is slightly better. There's a lot of party talk that goes on to keep things interesting. And the dungeon crawling, it's actually fun. It's fun throughout the entire game, and I enjoyed it. Like, it really is just a massive improvement on what the original game had. I could never go back to the original game's dungeon crawling again. This is just so much better. When it comes to the social links and life sim elements, nothing has really been changed here, and it kind of shows what they had in the original game was already gold. Sure, there might have been a few tweaks here or there, especially with some of the values needed for like upping your social stats, but for the most part, it's relatively the same, and I like it just as much, if not more, than the original game. It's great stuff. I love hanging out with the characters, upping my social stats, planning what I'm going to do every day, strategizing, and then it being really rewarding when I actually am able to complete a social link. It's great stuff. Something else that was obviously improved for the remake is the visuals. This game looks excellent. I really love how it looks. The characters look great. The animation is solid. The environments look good. Yeah, it's a good looking game, and the music slaps. I'm not a fan of all of the remixes in this game from the original, but I like a majority of them, and I think the music is still very good. I don't have any issues with the presentation. I really don't have any issues with the gameplay either. It's low-key peak Persona gameplay. Sure, the dungeons are not as good as Persona 5 since all of those are handcrafted, but the core gameplay itself, it is just as good as Persona 5's, and I think if you like RPGs, especially if you like Persona, you're really gonna like the gameplay. I very much recommend this game to people who like RPGs, have wanted to get into the Persona series, or maybe thought 3 was a little too crusty. You aren't gonna regret it with this one. This is an excellent game. It's also not stupid long like some of the other Persona games. Thanks to all the improvements, it is actually a bit shorter, taking around 50 to 60 hours, which is more manageable than say 100+ hours. Yeah, I really have no problem recommending this game. It's also on Game Pass, and is again, in my opinion, very much worth your time. And here we have Persona 4 Golden, which originally released for the Vita in the early 2010s, but has actually been re-released on all modern platforms and PC. Now, Persona 4, especially Golden, really is a legendary title, and a lot of people consider it one of the very best JRPGs ever made, and I totally agree with it. This game is fantastic, and they really look at every aspect from Persona 3 and ask the question, how do we make this better? How do we improve it? And they totally do. Now, when it comes to the story, it isn't that different from Persona 3, but it has no connection to Persona 3 at all. It takes place in this small town of Inaba, and it sees this new student showing up that is you. You're a transfer student going to a new high school. You know, you're just trying to chill out, enjoy school, enjoy life in this small town, and a lot of shit goes down, and that's all I'm really gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say because I don't want to spoil a single thing about this story. I really love the story of Persona 4. Like, I really like the story of Persona 3, but Persona 4's is even better thanks to even stronger characters, an excellent, intriguing hook that really kept me interested the entire game. And this is a long game, much better pacing than the third game, excellent world building, a very good antagonist. Like, Persona 4's story, plot, characters, world, themes, all of that. It is really well done. I really enjoy it, and I couldn't put this game down from when I started playing it. I remember just dropping like everything I was playing at the time because I just wanted to see what was going to happen in Persona 4 next. It's just really great. There's a lot of excellent moments. The writing is also very good. I'd say this is one of those few games where there's not a single bad character in the game. All of them are just really well done and very memorable. The story, characters, world, it's just kind of unforgettable with this game. So when it comes to the gameplay, it is very similar to Persona 3, the original Persona 3. It has a very similar structure and format where you live each day at a time. You go to school nearly every single day, and then you can hang out with people after school, you can up your social stats, and then of course there's plenty of dungeon crawling, and plenty of things that are ready to kick your ass. When it comes to the battles, it is very similar to Persona 3. The big key difference is you can actually just directly control your party members, which is immediately just way better than P3's battles. But aside from that, I'd say the battles are a bit better. It's smoother, it's faster, it's more refined, it's not as challenging as P3, it's not as annoying, and I just had more fun with it. probably because, you know, I could control my party members. Now, while I think the battle system is way better than the original Persona 3, I will give some credit to Persona 3 Reload and say that I think it is better than what P4G has, but it also came out after. So that's probably not the most fair comparison. What I'm trying to say is that the battle mechanics are very good. If you like Persona 3, really if you like any SMT game, you're going to like the battle mechanics here. Now when it comes to the dungeon crawling, it is not just one giant tower, there's actually several dungeons you'll go to, and while these are randomly generated, I didn't find them anywhere near as annoying, tedious, or just generally copy-pasted like the original Persona 3. I think these dungeons are a lot better, and it doesn't feel like they're totally randomly generated. It feels like there is some handcrafting here and some thought, and I think the dungeon crawling, it's fine, the movement's fine. I don't have any glaring issues with it. Like the battles, I think the dungeon crawling is actually better in Persona 3 Reload, but it came out later, but the level design in this game is certainly better than anything Persona 3's ever had. Now, outside of the battling and the dungeon crawling, we have all the life sim elements and social links, and this really is untouched from how it was in Persona 3 Reload or not, where you get to interact with people, you get to raise your social stats, there's new areas to go to, plenty of social links, and I really enjoy all of this. I think it's just as good as it was in P3, if not even better. There's more to do, I think the areas are better, I think the social links are better, and I just found it even more rewarding than the previous game. I really enjoy the life sim elements actually. Maybe it's because I just love Animal Crossing or life sims like this in general, but P4G has some of the best life sim gameplay you'll find in any video game. It's really great and it's aged incredibly well. And some of the social links you make here are some of the best social links of the entire franchise. There's some really amazing ones here, unforgettable ones even. I feel like I know some of these characters better than my own friends and family, especially because you spend so much time with them. This is a really long game. This is when the Persona games started getting stupid long. This game is well over 70, 80 hours to complete. It's a very long game. But it is an incredibly rewarding, fulfilling experience that I do not regret taking at all. I have no problem recommending this game to legit anybody that breathes air. Even if you don't like RPGs, I think you might like this game still. There is just so much going for it. The gameplay is great. The story and characters and world are fantastic. The presentation is pretty good. The graphics aren't amazing, but they're still nice and stylized, and the music is just fantastic. Like, the music might even be better than Persona 3's music. It's that good. I love the world of Iniba. I'd love to go visit it one day if it was real, but it's not. But hey, regardless of all that, this is an excellent video game that I think should really be experienced. But it's not my top Persona game. My favorite Persona game, and what I believe to be the best of the Persona series, is Persona 5. I'm sure plenty of people are shaking their head or groaning at this, but I am not a contrarian today. I am very much going with what is the normie or popular pick. Persona 5 really is one of my favorite games of all time. Especially now that Royal is out, it really is a phenomenal experience, and it was Persona 5 that shot the series into the stratosphere and superstardom and made it become a mainstream franchise. Like, don't get it twisted, the older games absolutely had fans, but there's a very big increase in fans after Persona 5. It's about as mainstream as it gets for a JRPG series outside of Pokemon or Final Fantasy. Now, I did not play Persona 5 at release, and you know, I heard pretty great things about it. I heard it was an excellent experience, but when I finally sat down and played it, I remember it was in between college semesters, and I was hooked. I was so hooked. This game sunk its teeth into me like it's Edward or all of his stupid fucking family. Like, I could not play anything else. I could not do anything else. I played like 3 or 4 10 to 12 hour days straight of this game. I was in love with Persona 5, and those feelings have not gone away. I just love this game. Like, with a capital L out here, I love just about every aspect of this game. Let's talk about the story. Like the previous 2 games, you know, you are a new student coming to a new town. This time it's Shibuya, and you're just trying to live your normal high school life, and a bunch of shit goes down to stop you. You aren't going to be living anything close to a normal life in this game, and the story, oh, it's so good. It is so good. Look, Persona 4 has a wonderful story, one of the best of any video game, but Persona 5's, oh, it hits different. It's just unbelievably good. The story in Persona 5 is stupid good. It is one of the best stories of any video game I've ever played, with a fantastic world, amazing realized characters with a lot of depth, arcs, some of the best pacing and writing you'll find in any video game. Like, there is not much to dislike, if anything to dislike, with this game's story, world building, characters, all of that. It is so good. It is just stupidly good. I'm running out of positives to describe how much I like the stories of these games, but Persona 5 is my favorite story. I believe it's the best story. I could totally see why someone would say Persona 4, but in my opinion, Persona 5 is the best of the stories. And I know this might be a bit of a hot take, but I also think Persona 5 is the best characters. I love the characters of Persona 4 so much, but Persona 5's characters are some of the most lovable, likable, charming characters characters of any video game. They're all great. There's really not a bad one here. Even the characters you probably aren't supposed to like, I don't think they're bad either. But enough about all that, let's actually talk about the gameplay. When it comes to the structure and format and core gameplay, it is very similar to Persona 3 and 4. The structure is actually the same, where you live each day to day, you have to go to school like every day, and then you have some free time after school. And in terms of the life sim elements, it's virtually the same as the other ones. You can hang out with your friends, you can hang out with some other people, you make social links now called confidants, you can raise your social stats, you can go prepare for battle and buy equipment or merge personas or any of that stuff. That's also in 3 and 4 that I should have mentioned. Or you can simply just vibe in Shibuya, which is always great, and it's very realized. I've been to Shibuya and yeah, it really does look like this. But on the life sim side of things, yeah, it's basically the same as the previous games, and it's just as good, if not even better. There's more to do, there's more social links. I really like how rewarding it all is, and just exploring this world and meeting everyone and doing as many things as possible, it's really great. Now when it comes to the dungeon crawling and the battles, yeehaw, this is some good shit. When it comes to the dungeon crawling, it is the best of any Persona game. There's no random generation here. It is all handcrafted and very personalized for each dungeon, and it is some of the best dungeons you'll find in any RPG. They are all fantastic. They all have unique gimmicks. They keep things interesting. They're engaging. They're memorable, and it's just so much fun to go through these. You can actually be stealthy in a lot of them as well. The game heavily encourages it, but the dungeon crawling is some really great stuff, and the movement options are excellent. It really feels like they brought Persona into the modern day, and the dungeon crawling is just incredibly realized. It's so good. When it comes to the battle mechanics, ooh, this and P3R really are peak SMT gameplay. I guess Shin Megami Tensei 5's up there, but this is some peak gameplay. It is so good when it comes to the battles. If you've ever played any SMT game, you'll know how this works with the criticals, the one-mores, the weaknesses, the strengths, but it is just so refined. It has a great feel to it, an excellent pace, it's rewarding. It's not the most challenging, but it's just a ton of fun, and I just love the pace of these battles. You will certainly need some strategy here, but probably not as much as you did in, say, Persona 3 and 4. There are some new additions like the Baton Pass that make it even better than ever, and the gameplay in the battles is just so good. It's so much fun. I've never not had a good time with this, and it doesn't matter if it was hour 2 or hour 80, like, it's a great time when it comes to the battles. And speaking of length, this is a very, very long game. It's one of the longest games ever made, taking most people 100+ hours to finish. When I finished the original Persona 5, I was only around 60 something hours, but Royal, oh yeah, that's a really, really long game. You'll be playing this game for a very long time, but like Persona 4, incredibly rewarding, fulfilling experience that I have no problem recommending to legit anybody. Anybody that can breathe air, I think you're going to like this game. At the very least, I think you're going to like the presentation. The presentation in this game is amazing. It is so good. It is so realized. I could just pop off all day long about the graphics of this game. It's just so good. I love every square inch of it, from the character models, the environments, the art style, the aesthetic, the menus, how wonderful the user interface is. When you get the all-out attack, it's just amazing. It is so cool. It is just, oh, it's so good. And the soundtrack is pretty much goated at this point. Like, it just doesn't get any better for music in a video game. It's probably my top 10 favorite soundtracks of all time. It's that good. Now, Persona 5, if you haven't been able to guess it by now, it's one of my favorite video games of all time. It's just a delightful experience that I cherish very much, and in my opinion, it is one of the greatest video games ever and one of the very best RPGs you could play, period. I think everybody should try it, and I'm going to be very excited when one day they finally move to Persona 6. How do you top Persona 5? That is the real question. We will have to wait and see. But that is it for today's video.
Well, that's it for this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Now, our secret code word today, if you made it to this part of the video, comment just, I guess, stupid anime games, since all of these are just stupid anime games anyway. Okay. They're not.